Hey everyone, it's Brittany of BZ Art, and as you can see, I have a new filming setup. Now my camera can get a lot closer to the sewing machine, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing better. So to give it a test run, I figured we'd make a bat pattern. And I know I already have a bat tutorial, and there's a lot of other patterns that could use a tutorial, but the bat is my most popular one, so I figured it was time for a redo. Now before we get started, there are birds in the craft room and they can be kind of noisy, so if you hear them in the background, that's what's going on there. And another thing I wanted to mention is the bat pattern is not a super easy pattern. I do mark this as one of my more intermediate or advanced patterns, so if you're still quite new in your sewing journey, I recommend doing this first with a scrap fabric because there are some techniques you might not have come across here before. But if you are quite new, I still definitely encourage you to try. I always want you to push yourself and to keep learning new things. So without any further ado, I am going to start here. So to start, we are going to take two ear pieces, one with our main color fabric, which is going to be the color of most of your bat, and one with the accent fabric, which today I'm using a purple galaxy print. I do get my galaxy print custom printed from Spoonflower, if you're wondering. So you're going to place those with right sides together, and you're going to sew all the way around the rounded edges, keeping this top here, or bottom, if you're facing this way, open. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and turn this right side out. And I've already done this the other ear. Oh, and one thing I should mention before we keep going is that a lot of people on my Facebook group, BZ Art Bees, have reported that this pattern can be a lot easier if you enlarge it to about 150 or more. So if you're really struggling, I would recommend trying that too, because a lot of the difficulty of this pattern just comes from how small all these pieces are. So I'm going to go ahead and set these aside, and we're going to get out the head pieces. If you haven't already done so, cut the dart down the line there. And then we are going to take the ears and fold them in half so that this the accent fabric is on the inside. And then we're going to pin that. And we're going to do the same thing with the other ear. Except first I'm going to show you guys this helpful trick to make sure that you're pairing it with the right side of the head. So what happens is we're going to sandwich the ear in between the dart of the head like so. But the way the ear is facing makes a difference in how it's going to turn out in the end. If you have it the wrong way, you're going to end up with backwards or inside out or upside down ears. So the trick I like to use is I'll lay a head piece flat, I'll lay the ear piece flat with the accent fabric facing out, and you should see this bump on the back of the ear facing the same way as the bump on the back of the head, and the long curved edge will be facing towards the snoot. Fold it here. Pin there. And then that will be the way you insert it into the ear. So that way everything will stay nice and straight. I'm just going to repin this so it also includes the headpiece. And then I'm going to repeat that for this side. So the bump, again, if you can kind of see on the back here, this is the side with the bump. And you want it on the same side as the back of the head. And I'm just folding it in half and pinning. And then you're going to go ahead and sew up the dart for both sides of the head. Alright, and then you're going to take the head gusset and fold it in half on itself, and then just sew this dart at the bottom. You're going to take one side of the head and the head gusset. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to sew this side of the head to one side of the gusset, this side of the head to the other side of the gusset. And I'm going to start by pinning. This is point A at the nose here. And I'm going to pin it all the way around to point B, which is down here on the neck. If this ear gets in the way for you, you can push it flat like so and pin it down so that it's out of the seam. I'm just going to kind of leave it folded. And next what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the point A all the way around to the point B, again making sure that we're not sewing that ear up into the seam. Now we're going to pin the other side of the head onto this side of the dart. Or not dart, the gusset, I apologize. And then at the bottom where the two head pieces meet, you're going to go ahead and pin those together as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew from, we're going to actually start at point B, but if you are having a hard time getting the ends of your nose here to meet up, it's more important that this looks nice than the back of the head here, because this will mostly be hidden when you sew it onto the body of the bat. But I'm going to start at point B, sew around to point A, and then I'm going to sew back down around the bottom of the heads to sew those together and leave about a 1 to 2 finger width here to turn the head right side out. Alright, so now that's done. The next step is going to be to insert the eyes. So you can make a mark on each side, and well, I've already made the mark rather, but you can put a hole on each side. But what I like to do to ensure that I get even eyes is to go through both sides of the head. Now, I would not do this unless you feel confident doing so, because you kind of can't see what's happening down there, so it could be a disaster. But if you feel sort of confident, I like to push the ears down. I like to flatten out the head as much as I can with the gusset kind of tucked up there. And I will take a very tiny, very sharp pair of scissors and make a very little cut through to both sides. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with that, like I said, do an individual cut on each side. If you're going to cut it with scissors, make sure it is very small. You don't want the eye to eventually stretch that out. Another option is to use an owl, AWL, it could be pronouncing that wrong, I don't know. And what you will do is work it through the fabric threads and push them apart rather than cutting it. And that's just another option to make sure that the eyes are a bit more secure. So what you're going to do then is take the safety eyes, insert them through the head, out through the eye hole, and secure the washer on the back. And this step is optional as well, but I do like to use a pair of wire cutters to trim the post of the safety eye so that it can sit a little bit better inside the head. And then you can go ahead and turn the head right side out. And then you're going to go ahead and stuff it quite firmly. Alright, and once that's done, you can just set the head aside for later. And we're going to move on to the body. So the next step is the feet, and this is another area that gives a lot of people some trouble. So these feet are quite small and difficult to manage, especially around the toes. My tip for you is going to be to go very slow. If your sewing machine has a wheel on the side that will allow you to manually operate it, I recommend sometimes even using that so that you can stitch individual stitches and not accidentally go too fast. Another good tip is to cut out a larger area around the foot than you think. This is just a 2D shape, so it really doesn't matter how much excess fabric you have around the outside of it. And finally, if all else fails, just leave the feet off. A lot of people do leave the feet off, or you can take a no-sew option and just use a layer of wool felt and just have a 1-layer foot. Both of those are really good choices if the feet are too difficult. So I'm going to start here at the top, go around the toes, and then end there, leaving this top part open to turn it right side out. Right, and then when you're done, make sure that you clip your seam allowance as close to the seam as you can, especially in the toe area. You've probably seen me cutting my seam allowance for most of this pattern. I kind of do that with everything, it's just a habit, but especially on this pattern because it's so small, it can really help to make sure you're clipping your curves and cutting off excess seam allowance. And so once you're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it right side out. And to do this, I use my hemosteps. I grab each individual toe and I turn them right side out, and then I turn the entire foot. I've already done that with the other foot, so we're just going to set these aside for now and move on to the belly. And the belly piece has this dart at the bottom here, so we're going to fold it in half and sew up this dart. Now we're going to attach the wing pieces to the belly, but before we do that, it's very important that you trim the seam allowance on these curves, and to do that, you'll just make these little snips close to, but not quite onto the seam allowance, and that will give the fabric enough ease to bend the way it needs to go, which otherwise it wouldn't be able to do because the seam allowance would hold it too tight. So we're going to take one side and align it with one side of the belly from point C to D, and I'm going to pin that in place. All right, and once it's pinned along there, we're going to go ahead and sew from C to D. And we're going to repeat that process to attach the other wing. And that attaches both of the wings. And the next step is to sew the back of the bat, and this is another area that can give people a lot of trouble because you might not have ever encountered this before. So what's happening here is it's actually two darts that meet up to form an M shape, and so what we're going to do is we're going to sew one dart and then the other dart, and then we'll fold the whole belly or back in half and sew that. So to start, you're going to find the point labeled I, and that's where we will fold the bat so that these points J and H will meet up. And then you're going to sew from the I to the H and J point. And as you can see, that's all sewn up. So what we will do is we'll find this G point and fold it at the G so that F and H meet up. And then we're going to sew from the G to the F and H point. Okay, so now that both of those are sewn up, you get kind of this V point, and this point where they all meet up, we'll be folding it there so that E and K meet, and then we're going to sew that line from E and K to this point where all of these darts meet. And that gives you one glorious bat booty. The next step is going to be to sew the front of the back to the bat, or the front of the bat to the back. There is a tongue twister for you. So I'm going to lay the front out here, and I'm going to pin these feet in place, one on each side of the seam. And then we're going to pin the front to the back, and I like to start pinning right here where this seam meets with the front dart seam, and that way I know that that area is nice and aligned. And then we're just going to go ahead and pin all the way around. Right, once that's pinned, I'm going to start at point C on one side of the neck, sew all the way around, and then stop at point C on the other side of the neck, leaving this space open to turn it right side up. Checking the back side here, it looks like I missed just a little bit along the bottom where the fabric shifted, so I'm just going to go back over that. And then I'm going to cut off my excess seam allowance and turn it right side out. And once you get to this step, the next part is going to be to sew along this seam, which is what's called stitching in the ditch. So we're going to push all of this fabric, because you do have this booty. You want to make sure the wings are nice and flat, so we'll push all the fabric that way. And then what you're going to do is line your needle up exactly as you can with that seam, and the goal is to sew directly onto the other seam line so that you hide the new one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to top sew the detail in the wings here. I'm just going to eyeball it, but if you want to get it exact, what you can do is take the pattern piece, you'll just cut a line where the detail lines are on the pattern piece, lay it over the wing, and trace them with an air-soluble marking pen, and then go back over them. But because I've made so many bats, I don't need to do that. Alright, and we'll just repeat those two steps with the other side. Again, you're going to take all the fabric and push it towards the middle so that the wing is nice and flat. Next thing we're going to do is fill the bat and stuff it. So I like to put about 1/8 cup of poly pellets into here, and these are just plastic pellets that'll help it sit and give it weight. So that ends up being about halfway on the body, and then we're going to go ahead and use stuffing for the rest. The next step is going to be to do all the hand sewing to finish up your bat. So to start, we're going to ladder stitch the head onto the body, and a good rule of thumb here I like to use is to make sure this seam is lined up with the belly seam for a nice straight head. And what you're going to do for the ladder stitch is insert the needle into the inside of the plush, pull it out, in and out, in and directly back out. And you'll just repeat this process until you're done, and occasionally you'll pull this nice and tight. Once you've attached the head, the final step is to make the ears upright. And so to do this, I like to put my finger right in the ear here and push it up. And where it meets the head is where you're going to stitch. So I'll put a needle here to hold the ear in place. Oops. And then again, we'll just stitch right where it meets up with the head there to hold it upright. So again, we're just going to repeat that for this side. Put my finger in there, push the ear up, put a pin, and then sew it in place. And there you have one finished bat.